Call is being recorded. Alejandra, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So hello everyone. I'm Alejandra Guillen. I'm a cloud solution architect from Microsoft, and today we're going to be pretty much talking a brief introduction about Data Factory. So this is a little bit about myself. I have been working with Azure Cloud for a little bit over 8 years now, and I have been working in Microsoft as a cloud solution architect for 2 years. So a little bit of the agenda, we're going to be doing an introduction to Azure Data Factory. What are the components? How the security looks like? What about monitoring? How can I see those pipelines running, and how can I monitor my pipelines? And about how about DevOps, right? That's a very common lately. And a brief demo of how all of this looks like in Azure. So what is the need, right? Right now we have a lot of data going around, and pretty much the problem will be, what do we do with this data sources from on-premises, from SaaS services, from anywhere, right? So, and how do we manage this data to be eventually analyzed and has a business value, right? So Data Factory is meant for do that, to go ahead and do your ETL processes for big data, for small data, for whatever you need, and eventually do an analytics side of that data and actually take a value of it. So Data Factory has a code-free UI that you can pretty much, we're going to see a drag and drop kind of boxes that you can integrate your data with. You can rehost your SSIS packages with a few clicks. You have Git integration to accomplish CI/CD or pretty much DevOps now. You pay pretty much space as you go. You just only going to pay for whenever your pipelines are running. It's a fully managed serverless service, right? It could be kind of not serverless, and we're going to talk that in a minute, but from out of the box, it's a serverless essentially service. It has a lot of connectors. It has a 90 plus right now connectors, and I will keep double checking because it keeps growing. And you can pretty much orchestrate the entire pipeline from a single UI and a single portal right now. So these are a few of the connectors that Data Factory has to offer. Of course, it has big data, even connecting to Amazon Redshift, to BigQuery, HDFS. You have data warehouses, data. You have SaaS apps, for example, ServiceNow, Salesforce, and of course, all of the Azure data services, right? So it's a single point of integration for all of your operational data. So how does that look like in a data warehouse world, right? You have usually 3 personas, which is going to be the data engineer, the data scientist, the citizen integrator, right? So sometimes, of course, they can overlap, but that's kind of how we can look at it, right? So you have the data sources, on-premises, multi-cloud, SaaS data, as we discussed, that gets injected for those connectors, right, that the Data Factory has to offer. And then you have to transform that data using activities, using, I don't know, stored procedures, notebooks, some Databricks, whatever you need, right? And then you serve the data in a data warehouse, or instead of Azure Synapse Pool in this scenario. And of course, eventually, if you want, you can actually visualize the data, maybe Power BI, right, to get the data from what after it's transformed to actually have a business value. All of that can be done pretty much on an orchestration and monitor via Data Factory. So what are the components? Like, how can I create these pipelines? Well, these are a few of the components. Pretty much these are the components of Data Factory, the main ones that it has that you're going to be dealing with. You have triggers. Any pipeline requires a trigger. For example, a scheduled trigger like hourly, daily, I don't know, even by minute, right? And that kicks off pretty much a pipeline, right? If we are here, we choose to start our pipeline, and a pipeline is the ETL process itself. So it's a group of activities. Hey, I need you to extract this data. I need you to transform this data, and I need you to put this data here. So that is the pipeline process. Now, a activity, it can be, you have different that we're going to see it in the portal, but activity can be a copy, right? An extraction. It can be a stored procedure. It can be a data flow. It can be, I don't know, you name it. There an Azure function that's triggered an Azure function because I have custom code that I want to run. And usually activities read or pretty much produces any data set. a data set. It can be a table from a SQL database, right? It could be a file from a storage. It's an extraction of the data. It's a data set of a bigger data source, right? The link service is that connection to that data source. So the connection to the SQL server, the connection to the cluster, or the connection to the data lake, right? So that is the link server. So all of this data set is just a snapshot or a extraction of that link service. And of course, all of this, it's running on an integration runtime. The integration runtime is the compute underlying infrastructure that Data Factory steps on. So you can use different kinds. So there are mainly three, essentially. You have Azure integration runtime. That means Azure manage it, right? You don't have to care about what it is. It actually comes with a default Azure. You can create another one if you need to. You have self-hosted. That is mainly if you want to run this integration runtime on premises, you could. You download the integration runtime service, and then you pretty much configure it and connect to the Data Factory and keep working, right? Of course, that it also applies if you want to run it in the cloud, but you want to have to manage it, you want to secure, you want to build your virtual network very robust. You can do that as well with self-hosted IR, so it can run on a Windows server, right? And last but not least is the SSIS integration runtime, which means it's pretty much to run your SSIS packages, to lift and shift that. So after you have that, of course, we're going to talk about activities, but one of the main ones is data transformation, data flow, data wrangling. So data flow is to clean your data, transform your data, aggregate your data. So you can see here a little bit of snapshot. So you start with a data source, and then you can do operations like very UI-like, hey, I want to join this, and it actually show you what type of join you want to do, inner join, outer join, whatever you need. And then you can cleanse that data out doing several transformations. This both run on top of a Spark cluster that it gets created for you in order for this to run. Data wrangling, it's powered by Power Query. So in order for you to do maybe add columns, combine the data, like data modeling more scenario. So data security for enterprise, for any application, right? In a company, it's always data security. So Data Factory, the first question that everybody asks is like, hey, what about data exfiltration, right? How can I secure my data, because this is accessing my SQL server? So how this gets accessed? Well, you have two things, right? You always to think about. You have networking and you have authentication. So for the authentication piece, let's talk about that one first, is you have managed identity and service principal, which is similar to, I'm pretty sure they're probably already familiar, but service principal is kind of like a service account, right, on premises. So they can go ahead, have your own kind of username, password that live in Azure Active Directory. Go ahead and authenticate, right, with those credentials and come back. Managed identity is similar to a service account, right, but it does not have a password that you manage. Actually, Azure manage it for you. And it's intended to build or live essentially on each one of these PaaS services. So you can enable ADF identity and say, hey, go ahead and authenticate to this storage account, right? And say, hey, this is ADF, and I have access to get data, for example, or read data only or write data only on this storage account or this SQL server. So that is the authentication piece, right? Also, you may like, well, that works great in an Azure world. What about my SaaS, right? My SaaS application, or even my on-premises SQL servers. So in that case, you will probably want something like Key Vault. So essentially, Key Vault comes to the picture. You can go ahead and store any credentials that you want in Key Vault, and Data Factory can easily go ahead and get it from Key Vault. They have that integration built in as a link service as well. So you do a link service to Azure Key Vault, and it will go ahead and get that from there. So developers do not have access to passwords. So you can even abstract that as a security level. Now, what about networking, right? So like I said, you have different flavors. One of the latest ones is going to be the managed virtual network. essentially for Azure IRs. That means that Azure manages the VNet that is in here. And I don't know if you're familiar, but then you are able to connect via private endpoint. So whenever you connect pass to pass, I'm going to very simple explain it. Pass to pass is via public endpoint, right? Like this storage account creates you a fully qualified domain name, which means mystorage.com, let's put it that way. And that's a public endpoint. You don't essentially want that to be that open to the internet, right? So when you enable private endpoints, it disables that internet connectivity and allows Data Factory go ahead and connect via Microsoft private backbone network. So that is great for avoid any data exfiltration as well. And the good thing is that you don't manage this underlying infrastructure and you don't manage essentially the VNet either. Again, if you want to have more control, you always have the self-hosted IR for full control, and then you can decide what to do on these things. So monitoring inside of Data Factory is a monitoring solution. We are going to see that in a minute. You can go ahead and check your pipeline runs, why they failed. You can even get alerts, and you can integrate with Azure Monitor to create even events and alerts or metrics on that. And last but not least is going to be the Git integration. So this means how do we do DevOps in Data Factory, right? Like I mentioned, it's a code-free solution. So how can I move from my development to my test to my prod in a data pipeline perspective? Well, you configure Git in your ADF dev, and when your developers do a change in the dev branches or feature branches, they're going to create a pull request to your main or master branch, right? That will hit a publish to this ADF instance and actually be live, right? And on the ADF dev instance. And then that will create a publish on the ADF publish branch, which is where Data Factory live is reading from on this dev instance. And now DevOps kicks in. At this moment, we are working with ADF. We are just working with ADF dev, but we can create a release pipeline waiting for this ADF publish branch and say, hey, whenever you have something new here, which generates an ARM template, go ahead and release this definition, release this to my test and to my production. That means that developers should not have access to test and production. That should be only release or provision via DevOps pipeline. And you can customize it. You may ask, well, but I have my key vault from dev. Yeah, you have a parameters file that you can change and say, hey, when you're going to production, go ahead and this is the key vault that I want you to essentially to configure, right? It's the key vault from production. And this is the key vault for test. The same for SQL, the same for the rest. So this is how it looks like. We're gonna see it if we have time. So let's go ahead and jump into the Azure Portal. So I have deployed several resources, right? I have 2 data factories. I have two SQL servers, 2 of everything, 1 for dev, 1 for prod, right? And I don't know if you're familiar with Data Factory homepage. You have tutorials here. You have a create from templates, so you can create your own templates or start from a template if you don't know where to start. That means, for example, hey, I want to move data from SQL, but I have no idea where to get started. So this is, let me refresh. Let me go to my production in the meantime. See, that's different. Don't you love when this happens? Okay. So I'm gonna talk you through it anyways. But so in the homepage, you're gonna find so how to create a first pipeline, how to create a data flow. You're gonna find tutorials. You're gonna find templates. Templates, like I was mentioning, they're pre-built pipelines and they have a solution in mind. For example, hey, go ahead and execute this SSIS package. How do I do that? And they will have a pre-built template from Microsoft, right? That you can go ahead and tell it will tell you, well, you're going to need these link services and you're going to need these data sets. So you can go ahead and customize it from the template. And then when you hit OK and deploy, it will create the entire pipeline for you with some parameters, essentially. Those are kind of ways to get started. So let me see if I can relaunch this, because this is not working. So this is a data factory. We usually go to author and monitor. And that should kick the data factory portal. That seems to be loading a little bit faster. Let's see.
It's always the demo time when it's not.
Yeah,
gonna
yeah.
load.
I have run this like 3 times. Okay,
Sure.
so let me see. Probably I will show you here then. If I have 2, so one of them should work. No, it's not loading just data factory altogether. Okay. Okay, so let me show you here in the meantime. So this is my production one. You have when you go to the author or the little pencil right over here, you can create a pipeline, right? You can go ahead, create a pipeline from the template, create a data set, create a data flow, Power Query, or to create the copy data tool, which is going to a prettier UI. If you want to start from scratch, you essentially create a pipeline. This gives you a blank canvas essentially here, and we have all of the activities that we just talked about, right? You see, you have execute another pipeline. One pipeline can talk with another pipeline. We can go ahead and execute a store procedure in SQL, and we just drag and drop, and it will, whenever you click on each one of this, you see that the bottom side is changing to that particular activity. It will let you know, hey, what pipeline do you want to invoke? I only have my data pipeline, so let me do that. Do you want to wait on completion? Yes, I want to do that, and this is ready. Now imagine that I need this pipeline to complete, and then I want to execute my store procedure. So how do we configure that store procedure in this case? We go ahead and go to the link service. It's going to look for the one that makes sense. In this case, my Azure SQL and my store procedures. It will start loading. And awesome, I have 2. Let's go ahead and say log error. And awesome. So how do this wait for this pipeline or this activity has to be executed because before this activity does? So you see this green thing over here. This is actually an activity on after this success, failure, completion, or skip. So you can decide when this store procedure is going to be executed. Well, I want it to be executed on success. So if this succeeded, I want this store procedure to run. Imagine that you have your own, I don't know, a webhook or a web REST API that you want to get alerts from. And again, this is very custom, but I can say, hey, if this fails, I want to know. You can do this with Azure Monitor, but I want to know, and I want this to be recorded here. And now I have 2 paths that Data Factory will go ahead and execute. Okay, so let's see this data pipeline for a second. So this is the kind of like the pre-built one. So a pipeline also have parameters. Okay, so it has parameters, it has variables, and it has an output. For the testing of my demo, I created a variable to be my file name. I want my file name to be attached or to be essentially a concat, and I'm using this one, a concat of my name and my UTC now time, because I want it to just be incrementing every time for the purpose of the demo, right? So then I do an extraction of the data. I have my source, which is my SQL data, right? I can preview my data and I say, hey, give me that data over there. I want to see how that looks like before I get it and put it into data lake, right? So I can do a specific query if I would like to, instead of giving me the entire table. And then I need to sync it. I need to get it to the target, which in this case is my data lake, right? And I say, hey, the output is a CSV file that I want you to go ahead and use the same file name that I just created, which is at the moment of the pipeline run. And then the mapping, I'm not doing any mapping. It's going to go ahead and translate that to CSV automatically, and I'm good to go. Now, once that I have this in my data lake, a data flow starts. So let's go to that data flow for a second. What I'm doing is saying, hey, I have my CSV already created, right? I have my CSV in which is my sales data in this case, and I want to join that data with I want to join that data, you see inner join, with my products data because I need that. So while I'm doing this, I can turn on the debugger and I can pretty much refresh that data and see the data preview. How will that look like? I can see the sales data, I can see the products data, and I should be seeing a very, very big data set here. And I can do the same for each one of those processes, right? So we can inspect it, we can go ahead and do it, and let's wait for a few seconds to come back. And of course, it failed for some reason. Okay, I'm gonna resource because this one does not have the sales bar. So that makes sense. Let me do this data preview here. This one should work. Okay, that's the other one. Okay, this is taking forever. Okay, but you should be able to see essentially all of the data sources here. This is the prod, so I don't have every single thing in prod that I have on dev, because ideally you should be doing this on dev, not in production, but you can see that eventually comes back. So it goes to the cluster goes to Azure SQL in this case, and get me my data. So you should be able to see data here, and then the join even on each one of those steps. You can do a data preview of your data. So the next step, it will be the actual monitor, right? Like, for example, in here, you see all of my failures. Why did they fail? I can actually see, hey, why are you failing, right? So you can see that it moved the data from this place to this place, but it looks like we're missing something here. Remember, right now I have CI/CD and I have to update parameters. So I can see the error message saying, hey, the sales CSV path, this path does not exist. So it's looking for a file that does not exist. So I have to fix that. So now I can know, if I go back here, and I see my monitor jumping up, this one is happy. This one I can actually see the data pipeline pretty much doing what it needs to be done. I can see that it read almost 500 rows. I can see that actually the stage time was 1 second, and the cluster startup time was 5 minutes and whatever seconds. So I can see the entire process end to end working. So why is it failing? Okay, so now let's go ahead and jump into the actual CI/CD. I don't know how I'm on time. Naveed, I want to double check with you.
You have 5 minutes.
Okay, probably I don't have time. Okay, so I have here my Git configuration, right? On my link services in here. I can show you how it works kind of like offline because I wouldn't have time. But you have my link services here. I have my integration runtimes on this view where you can add it, right? If I need an Azure SSIS lift and shift package, you will do this. You will require, for example, the node size, how many do you want, the addition that you want to use, or if you want to add just another one of an Azure. This is the one that comes with Data Factory, kind of like the out of the box, and it's public, and it's ready for you to use. Now, how the pipeline works. Let me jump into the pipeline. So what we have in here is that I have an artifact which is reading from, remember that branch, right, which is the ADF publish. And what I'm saying is, hey, every single time that a new ARM template is ready, a new changes in my publish pipeline, go ahead and keep this off. So what I'm doing here is, and I have on resources, you will get the session slides, I think, later. So you can go ahead and do the stop triggers. There is a note in the documentation that you need to stop the triggers and then start the triggers afterwards. But what it's doing is just an ARM deployment. So I'm here saying, hey, this is my ARM deployment, and here's what I'm changing, and this is my parameters for the factory. And if I click here, it will go ahead, which data factory you want to provision this? And this is where I say, well, I'm going to provision to production. You see that I can change this on the fly. Or even the key vault, which key vault do you want to use? I change this and say, hey, I want to use production, and I want to use production data lake and Azure SQL for production as well. If we go all the way to that. So here I'm able to go ahead and all of, you see that there's no password here because I'm using integrated with Active Directory. So all of my connections are going using managed identity. So if we go to a link service here, and we go to, let's go to Azure SQL, for example. You always select your integration runtime. And you select, for example, if you want to come from Key Vault in this scenario, or if you want to go ahead, in the case of Key Vault, if you want to use managed identity, which is what I'm using here. So I want to do a mix because you can have SQL servers on premises that it will not allow you to use managed identity, but you can always go to Key Vault and get any connection strings, or in this case, just the password from Key Vault directly, and that will be your secret management store. Any questions for the last 3 minutes? Sorry. If you don't have any questions, I can try to see if I can make this link service work. So let's try to create a new blob storage. And I want to use managed identity for that one. I'm on my main branch. So I will pick this, and I will pick Power Lunch. And see managed identity. I can test my connection to see if I can hit that storage account, right? And I can create it. Now I'm on my dev. Remember that it does not exist in my production. So I can go ahead and publish this. This will come in and say, hey, I want to publish to the ADF branch. You add in add link services here. You want to do that? I'm going to say, okay. This is publishing to my repos. And then we should be able to see here a new, there you go. We have a new release get started. It's being queued automatically. You can add approvals or something like that for scope for production to prevent this to go all the way through. You can go ahead and say, make sure that somebody approved for production probably. So, and what we should see here when that finishes is a new link service on design. Any question what this is running?
Please feel free to open the mic if you have any questions. So. Thanks, Alejandra. This is learned something new.
Yeah, so Data Factory it's a lot of things to offer and a lot to cover in 30 minutes, but yeah, it's very powerful. So if you haven't tried it, I'll do recommend it for several options.
So we have any kind of links where we can go and see it, like what kind of offering it's giving to us?
Sorry, can you repeat that question? The links for connectors or?
Yeah, links for the connectors and data factories, all those stuff, because it's pretty crisp, clear. I got it. Yeah, because somebody else wanted to know that. I need to know like where we have URLs, other places where we can go test this information, because it's a vast, right, data factory. We can do a lot of things.
Yeah, definitely. So on the end of the slides, I put some of the resources that of the touch bases that I talk about here, like, hey, how do you store the key vaults, to store credentials, RBACs, the managed VNet, how to monitor, and there's an end-to-end lab at the end. I saw it's pretty good. It's using pipelines, data flow, and I think it does not cover CI/CD, because it was meant more to up to data flow. But all of these are here. So if you go to the one thing, this is finished, is this is a documentation, one of the links that are there. I always recommend to start with the tutorials. So there are very simple ones for you to use, like for example, the copy data tool, and it goes step by step. So if you are not familiar, I do recommend to start here and then grow from it. Like, so you can start where to look, because Data Factory, like I said, is a lot from a single window, right?
Yeah.
So it can be overwhelming. So I would do recommend this here, depending on what you want to accomplish.
Yeah. And by the way, the slide deck link will be in our video's description, so you can download where all the resources, everything will be there. So.
Okay, perfect. And we have any kind of like feature? We'll have some lab scenarios, like other partners are providing it to have the workshop to the individuals to try to work on that particular stuff. So those kind of workshops will come from Azure side.
Yeah, you can look at online if there are any workshop. If there's any, we will share the link. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
And here all of the connectors, by the way, if again, I put some of them, but here are pretty much everything that we supported right now. And so you can take a look, like, hey, if you want something that I didn't cover, double check on the connectors list.
Okay.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. And thanks to Alejandra for presenting. Really appreciate it. I know we are a bit over time, but thanks again. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone, and see you next week for another session of Azure Power Lunch.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.